Hi guys, welcome back to Snakes and Adders. Here we are. We promised you that we'd cover this subject. I don't think we quite realised that it would be quite as involved as it was. Me and Paul went to the drawing board and started having a little chat and a brainstorm, and we realised that there's just so many more variables with lizards than there is with snakes. It's not as easy as sticking a metal rod up its bum and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. It's not going to be as easy as that, unfortunately, and there's a few things that we've got to go through. And I mean, we made all sorts of notes and graphs and all sorts of stuff. So what we've tried to do is try to organise our thoughts and try and break it down into maybe some of the more popular lizards and the way that we would be able to sex them. Now, lizards do not use exclusively just one of these. They could employ 2, 3 or even 4 of these factors, meaning that yes, as adults there can be multiple markers that denote an animal as a male or a female, and these can be incredibly obvious. The problem is, as juveniles, it's almost impossible, and any sexual dimorphism is not yet apparent. This is where the problem lies, and growing animals up in a social setting as juveniles into sexual adulthood can be highly problematic. We'll cover more about that later on, some final closing notes that I made. But we'll begin with plate 1. We'll see how this goes. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but we'll give it the best shot we can. It's all we can do. We're Northern, we give it the best we've got. So to uncover plate 1. One of the most commonly discussed ways of determining the sex of an animal is preanal, femoral or abdominal pores or glands. These emit a holocrine lipid, a fat that's full of pheromones, and they use it for chemical marking and sexual identity. And these can be highly variable. Examples of animals with preanal pores would be tokay geckos, African fat-tailed geckos and leopard geckos. So tokay geckos are genus Gecko, leopard gecko are genus Eublepharis, and African fat-tailed geckos are genus Hemitheconyx. Femoral pores, these are on the inside of the thigh, and the most common examples of that would be bearded dragons. You know, everybody who keeps beardies, if you check the thighs of your animal, you will see these femoral pores that look like little sore warts. So bearded dragons, genus Pagona, green iguana, genus Iguana, eyed lizards, genus Timon, and major plated lizards, genus Gerosaurus. Abdominal glands or abdominal pores are reserved solely to the casque-headed skinks. These are also known as the crocodile skinks of genus Triblinotus. So I have done some horrendously bad drawings that hopefully will aid us in the identification of these things. So what we're looking at here is some very crude illustrations of a male leopard gecko, a female leopard gecko, genus Eublepharis, species Macularis. Now, this is the vent, the cloaca, and the preanal pores would be arranged in a V in between the thighs. On the girls, they're very ill-defined. On a mature male, they are hollow and they are filled with a waxy type substance, and these are used for chemical marking of their territory of the males and used in sexual identification. On fully mature males, they also start to get some hemipenal bulges as well. This at the bottom is supposed to be a bearded dragon, and on this side we've got the boy, and we can see these really quite pronounced pores running along the inside of the thigh, and then on the females, far less well defined. So bearded dragons are probably one of the most commonly kept animals that are grown up in group environments, and as babies we do not have these easy ways of being able to tell. Sometimes we can use the cross section of the tail. If we hold the beardie with its bum pointing towards us and bend the tail over the top, we can look at the cross section of the tail, and this can help us with identification. Again, what we're looking for are the hemipenal bulges either side of the tail, whereas the female's cloaca is actually more round and full in the middle. So this is then defined by a singular bump for the girl, whereas there is a central crevasse or divot for the boys with a bump either side. So moving on, Another marker or markers that we can use for identifying sex would be the casque or nose ornamentation. Now, casques and nose ornamentations generally are reserved for the chameleons. So we've got the Yemen chameleon, which employs a different shape and size casque, and then there is the nose ornamentation of both the Jackson's chameleon and the Fisher's chameleon. So an example of this would be, what have I done wrong here? Scratch that. Scratch that. It's okay. We can save it. We can save it. That's it. Good job we're professional here, innit? Bear with me. Another way of being able to tell is using endolymphatic sacs, also known as endolymphatic calcium sacs. These are liquid calcium stored in the throats of lizards and also in the roofs of their mouth. These are commonly seen in day geckos, genus Phelsuma, the anolis lizards, tokay geckos again, genus Gecko, and crested geckos, genus Corolophus. Also, we're going to get hemipenal bulges, and there is no better example of that than the New Caledonian crested gecko, Corolophus ciliatus, who looks like a Victorian bulldog from behind when you're dealing with an adult male. The bearded dragons again, we get the hemipenal bulges. So now I will show you this picture, these wonderful drawings. And here we can see, in a very rudimentary illustration of a Phelsuma, which is a day gecko, the endolymphatic calcium sacs that look like jowls. And these jowls develop over time and they form a source that ebbs and flows alongside egg production throughout the breeding season. We have to be careful though with over provision of calcium, as these can become impacted and infected. Also, this is a rudimentary drawing of a what looks like a disabled crested gecko, but in the roof of the mouth of the crested gecko you will also find endolymphatic sacs, and these are in the roof of the mouth, and these again are used in egg production and being able to store the calcium. Now we're going to look at the belly of a crested gecko male and a crested gecko female. Crested gecko females are not devoid of a mass post-anally. There is something there, but it tends to be a bit more heart-shaped, whereas the boys are really quite obvious set of lumps, is the best way to put it, and it's very difficult on mature crested gecko to get the sexing wrong. But these are, as we can see, already just working through the groups, whether it be preanal, femoral, abdominal, the casques and nose ornamentation, the endolymphatic sacs, or the hemipenal bulges. There is a huge variety in the lizard families, which complicates things because this is supposed to be a beginner's guide, and as you can see, it's been a pain in the arse to put together. Other factors that can also be used in sexual identification or using sexual dimorphism is the dewlap. Now, certain lizards have got a flap of skin that hangs off the chin, and usually there's a bit of cartilage or bone that they can come firm, and it's like a sail. And nobody uses this better than the anolis lizards. If you look at Anolis equestris or Anolis carolinensis, these are used in communication and sexual attracting of females and the territory disputes to be able to get shut of any would-be challenger males. Another proponent of the dewlap is the iguanas. The Anolis are within the iguanid sort of superfamily, and the green iguanas, iguana, they also have a dewlap, again used for communication, both sexual and territorial purposes, where it's very common for the head bobbing and the aggression and that dominance, and you're going to see it particularly with your beardies, the same thing. Their chins go black, they bounce up and down. If we're submitting, then we'll wave, or we'll make some sort of show that we're submissive, but the boys are banging up and down, this is my tank, respect me. That's what they're trying to say. So, back to this one. Casques. I knew I'd got it in here somewhere. You thought I'd cocked it up, didn't you? So, casques. A boy Yemen chameleon. Big, tall, massive casque. and then a female, she's got a far shorter casque. Now there's something far more definitive on a Yemen chameleon, and that's on their hind feet. And as we look at their hind feet, if this is their tail coming down here, on their hind feet as they split, the boys have got a knuckle just here that the girls don't have. But for the purposes of the dimorphism, so we can visually see as an adult, one, the male's far larger, and two, his casque is far taller. And then we've got rudimentary drawings of the Anolis lizard with his dewlap out, or the male green iguana, with his dewlap for that communication and sexual dominance. Let's move on to the next one here. This is an example of crests that can be formed on lizards. So this is a plumed basilisk, Basiliscus plumifrons, absolutely stunning. And on the males, they develop these wonderful dorsal crests and caudal crests. So dorsum, caudal, okay? So, and then cranial crests as well. So incredibly spectacular animals, and the females are a lot more plain Jane and not as much going on. So obviously differentiation of the sexes as adults is relatively easy, and as well as that they would also use the femoral paws and other such cues as well, and hemipenal bulges may also be present. Here we can see a male Jackson's chameleon with his 3 horns, and on the females there might be just a tiny singular one in the middle where there isn't the 3. So many of the Trioceras chameleons have this sort of nose ornamentation. Also what we have as a major means, which we will probably all have seen in one form or another, is the use of colour. And colour is highly variable in the adult lizard world, where the males will try and attract females but also pose a threat to would-be challenger males. So as we can see with these rock lizards, this male is absolutely spectacular, slightly larger, more robust in build, the female somewhat more slight and a lot more drab with the browns and creams. Again, echoing back to our drawing of our Yemens here, we can see a side-by-side comparison of a boy and a girl with the casque height, but also the wonderful bright stripes and, you know, alert colours of the male, whereas the more subdued spotted colours of the female. So there are principles at play that we need to sort of discuss when it comes to the sexual identification of lizards and what the upshot of it all is. If you're in doubt, keep your animals separate. This is a golden rule. If we can't definitively sex them, or they're too young to sex, do not put them together. It's as simple as that. Protect your females. The females are smaller in build, lesser in mass, not as robust, more easily prone to stress, whether that be social, environmental or breeding. They can succumb to it if we're not careful, and prevent perpetual breeding stress. So here we have, study your social interactions, intervene if it becomes combative. There is a difference between grabbing hold of a female for the purposes of having sex, such as grabbing her by the scruff of her neck or by a forelimb and wrapping round so that we can anchor in for having sex, and it being full-on aggression. And you're going to have to learn how to differentiate the two. This is probably why it's best to grow up animals individually and decide whether you actually want to go down the breeding route, as this can introduce far more responsibility to yourself as a keeper moving forward, and it's something that you need to bear in mind. Also, ensure the eligibility for breeding. Now, how do we work out that a female's eligible or not? Truth be told, we need adequate fat stores, we need adequate mass of the female, and we need appropriate age. If any of those variables are out of sync, we're knackered, and we're actually destined for a fall, and the female is really going to become a cropper for it as well. So just on some notes that I made, you bear with me because I'm going to read them out to you so that we can these are my thoughts on it, and then there's just a couple of closing things that we can go through. Sexing lizards, particularly in immature animals, can be almost impossible. The markers for sexual identification are nearly always based upon the comparison of mature animals. Occasionally the use of magnifying instruments may help with paw identification. Now, just to pause there, that is used, they use a jeweler's loom and they look at the paws, preanal paws of leopard geckos to see if they can work out whether they're hollow or filled in. If they're hollow, they're a boy. If they're filled in, they're a girl. but the layman would not know what they were looking for. Poor development, hemipenal bulges, casques, crests, scales, etc. develop with time, and therefore to assume the sexes of younger animals can be problematic. The sexes of younger animals... As the animals mature, antagonistic behaviours can ensue. These behaviours are not seen in snakes. Now, whilst there might be some rudimentary sparring and the males may wrap round one another, actual full-on aggression, biting and all the rest of it, we don't see that commonly. And as long as there's a female not present, people cohabit male snakes with fair regularity, and there's no issue. Maybe like the animals noted for breeding aggression, such as green tree pythons or reticulated pythons, who can maim other male cage mates, yes, they're the exception. But things like corn snakes and stuff, they live together no problems, and there's none of the antagonistic behaviours. This is why cohabitation of immature lizards is an issue due to territory-based disputes taking place. This issue is no more prevalent than in bearded dragons, often the results of which can include dismemberment. Now, the amount of bearded dragons out there that have lost toes, feet or tails because of a cage mate showing aggression, or the fact that we don't know that we're accidentally growing two males together who are soon going to have a territory dispute. Dismemberment to varying degrees. Couple that with live food derived feeding frenzy and it's a recipe for disaster. Careful consideration must take place when creating groups of lizards cohabiting on a permanent basis. Similarly, the risks are not just restricted to male on male antagonism. Males mature sexually far faster than females. Sexual advances can be both protracted and stressful for the smaller, less dominant female. It is not unheard of for females to expire from these intense, dominant, submissive situations. We know from the stress studies that a stressor, regardless of origin, affects metabolism and plus dietary intake due to gastric ulceration. This therefore means that females can quickly succumb to the incessant advances of a perpetually amorous male. Invariably, it is far safer proposition to raise lizards in isolation rather than part of an unsexed social group. If the lizards represent a sizable investment, this should also be considered as maimed animals only fetch a fraction of their original value. No surprise there. As much of a headache as it may be, delay pairing for the sake of being certain. Oviposition in females can markedly deplete fat and calcium stores. A female must be allowed to convalesce postpartum. Males rarely respect a female's need to recuperate. This is the responsibility of the keeper to identify and react to social stresses within the vivarium. It doesn't come much clearer than that. I hope that wasn't overly confusing. In principle, if in doubt, don't do it. Why do you need to breed? If you're a beginner, is there any real purpose to you breeding to begin with? Would it not be more fruitful to learn how to keep your animal correctly in isolation and then be able to learn about the management of social interactions at a later date, once we're certain that we've got the general husbandry concerns down? The variables that go into deciding whether something is a boy or a girl is something that boils down to experience. And as you can see here, even me and Paul with 65, 70 years combined experience, we've had to sit and think, how do all the lizards differ from one another sexually? What is the sexual dimorphism between the groups? We won't have hit them all. We will have missed some of it out. This is a beginner's video. No doubt there are the advanced guys out there going, oh, I did never mention this. Yes, we'll have forgot stuff. We will have forgot stuff. But there's so much to take into consideration, and this was merely just to dip your toe into the principles of sexing lizards and how it's done. Another way that we can also differentiate, or the breeder may be able to offer a guess as to what sex something is temperature dependent sex. So this means that the temperature that the animals were incubated at is determined. The temperature the animals are incubated at determines the sex that they are at birth, or affects the probabilities. So say we have 29 degrees 75% of boys, and 27.5 degrees 50-50, and 26.5 degrees 75% of girls. So certain animals are affected in this way. Because of market pressures, or traditionally because of market pressures, because males would hatch out up to 2 weeks quicker than females, invariably most of the babies that came on the market were male. And this therefore made it even more problematic when some of the idiot shops that are out there, which still exist today, that cohabit huge groups of bearded dragons and sell them as two-for offers, they are actually storing up a whole shitstorm for the new person that's bought them. And that's because they cannot accurately sex them at such a young age, because the dimorphism that we've discussed in each of its guises, whether that be colour, size, dewlaps, endolymphatic sacs, preanal glands, femoral glands, abdominal glands, hempinal bulges, these markers aren't there yet. So it's a guess. And it would be disingenuous to think that everybody, oh, well, we just get it right 100%. Bollocks. Just making it up. So the problem that you've got is that they are taking a risk, they're letting you take the risk, and they're passing the buck on to you, and will bear no responsibility when it all goes tits up for you in a year's time, when your males hit sexual maturity and your female's still too small. Or you've got two boys and they decide one day, after a year and a half of living together with no problem, that they're going to rip each other to bits and break the hearts of your children that are watching this happen. There are species that give us no clue, that to the eternal frustration of the keeper. Skinks, I am looking at you. Skinks are a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. The exception to the rule generally being the casque-headed skinks, where the males have got the raised abdominal gland. We've got a respected blue-tongue skink breeder who came over from Buxton and spent 40 minutes stood in front of a tank arguing with himself about what sex the blue tongues were. Until you've got fully mature animals sat side by side, where you can draw some sort of build comparison, looking at a single animal in isolation, you could be led down the garden path, and many people have messed up. So usually with the skinks it's trial and error, and what they're waiting for are the antagonistic behaviours that are either sexual or combative to try and be able to work out. Some of the bigger lizards, such as the monitor lizards, particularly the most famous proponent of this being the bosque monitor or savanna monitor, which is Varanus exanthematicus, will actually avert the hemipenes when it has a wee or poo. So that's quite useful, but then you've got to catch it going to the toilet as well. And then it's down to size, and it's down to build and cranial mass and all the rest of it, but this all comes with time. So there is no quick fix to this. Sometimes we've just got to wait and see and work out what we've got. It's very difficult to sex from an early age. There are exceptions to this, and people no doubt will comment and make those exceptions known. But as a beginner, concentrate on keeping a single animal and keeping that single animal well. In time you can consider breeding, once you have considered all of the risks and all of the pitfalls, and you have studied thoroughly the species which you keep, to be able to identify the markers that differentiate the sexes. I hope that video was useful. Me and Paul worked hard on that earlier this week, and yeah, we're going to keep coming with the educational videos. We don't need to dance in a conservatory, we just need to tell you how to do stuff, you know. We're not trying to be daft, we're just trying to teach you the best way with clear advice. We'll keep the videos coming. We'll see you all soon. Cheers, guys.